Somewhere right now, someone is opening a trading app, certain this is the trade that finally makes them money. They're probably wrong, not from carelessness, but because the platform itself was built to earn more, the more often people like them lose. How does a regulated, publicly listed financial company build a business where your failure is, in a real sense, its success? And do it in plain sight, advertised on football jerseys and phone screens everywhere. Here's the strange part. Some of these companies aren't hiding it. Look at the bottom of almost any online trading ad in Britain or Europe today, and you'll find a sentence admitting that most people who use the platform lose money. Not might lose, do lose. And the ads keep running anyway. This isn't a story about a scam. Some of these firms are among the most respected financial companies in Britain. It's something stranger, an industry, born from a clever workaround to a 1970s law that grew into a global business where the customer's loss and the company's profit can be the very same event. Some firms insist they don't work that way at all, that they profit from fees, not failure. Others were caught doing exactly the opposite, secretly betting against their own customers, until one afternoon in January 2015 pulled the curtain back for good. Every empire has a story. Some are built on genius. Others collapse because of one decision. If you want to uncover the hidden stories behind the world's biggest businesses, subscribe to Empire Theory. The next empire we investigate could change the way you see business forever. To understand how this business survived 5 decades of scandal and regulation, we start with an Englishman, a law that made it illegal to buy gold, and a workaround so simple it created a trillion-dollar habit. In the early 1970s, British currency controls made it hard for ordinary citizens to simply buy gold. Stuart Wheeler, a barrister turned merchant banker with a lifelong fascination for odds, realized he didn't need to sell people gold, just the chance to bet on its price. In 1974, at 39, he borrowed £5,000 and founded Investors' Gold Index, letting British citizens speculate on gold's price without owning it. The Bank of England objected to the name. It became IG Index. Grokipedia, the mechanism was borrowed from bookmaking. Wheeler set a price for where gold would land. Clients bet above or below it. They weren't buying gold, they were betting against Wheeler's number, and against the house that set it. That distinction is the seed of everything that followed. In a normal trade, a broker connects a real buyer and seller. Here, the company itself could be the counterparty, quoting a price, taking the bet, and either offsetting the risk in real markets or simply keeping it and hoping the client was wrong. Almost nobody noticed this at the time, including the regulators. Spread betting sat under gambling law, not financial law, meaning winnings were tax-free. That, more than curiosity about gold, is what turned this into a real business. When gold prices soared through the mid-1970s, interest exploded, and Wheeler kept widening what people could bet on. Trading Academy. For years, it stayed a city curiosity. Then, in 1985, IG offered its first bet on a stock index, a small step that hinted at something bigger, a business letting ordinary people speculate on almost anything with a price. Through the 80s and 90s, the company added markets like a shop adding products, currencies, shares, interest rates, even sports. But the real transformation came from a decision every firm in this industry eventually faces: how to handle risk. If a company simply takes every client bet and does nothing else, it's exposed. If enough clients bet the same way and win, the company owes a fortune. That's a B book, betting against your own customers. The alternative is an A book. When one side of client bets gets too large, the firm hedges by trading the real market itself. If one client buys and another sells the same thing, the positions cancel out, and the company earns only the spread, the small markup between buy and sell, regardless of who wins. You side, from the outside, a B-book firm and an A-book firm look identical. Same app, same charts, same language about trading the world's markets. The only difference happens in a back office the client never sees. That ambiguity proved extraordinarily profitable. The internet gutted the cost of reaching customers. IG built an online platform in 2003, floated on the London Stock Exchange in 2000, and expanded into Europe, Australia, and Asia. What began as one man's 5,000-pound bet on gold became the anchor of a global industry, with dozens of rivals chasing the same retail customers. That race attracted rougher competitors. As spread betting evolved into its cousin, the contract for difference, sold globally as an investment rather than a bet, an ecosystem of aggressive Forex brokers sprang up worldwide. Many marketed themselves as neutral middlemen, using terms like no dealing desk to promise they had no stake in whether a trade won or lost. One of the largest, an American broker called FXCM, would become the industry's most instructive cautionary tale. By the mid-2010s, firms across the sector were processing trillions in trading volume. FXCM alone handled roughly $1.4 trillion in client trades in a single quarter. Underneath that growth sat a statistic almost nobody outside the industry understood. Across the sector, most retail clients were losing money, consistently, as a structural feature of leveraged, fast-moving products. Not bad luck, but math. The firms knew it. The public didn't. That gap was about to be tested by an event nobody saw coming. For 3 years, the Swiss National Bank had promised to cap the franc against the euro. Traders treated it almost like a law of physics. On January 15, 2015, the bank abandoned that promise without warning. Within minutes, the franc surged as much as 30%, one of the most violent currency moves ever recorded. Clients who'd bet the cap would hold didn't just lose their stake. Many owed their brokers money they didn't have. This is where the industry's hidden architecture became visible. Firms genuinely hedging client risk were themselves caught on the wrong side of a market that had just moved 30% in seconds. Alpari UK, sponsor of a Premier League football club, declared insolvency within hours. A New Zealand brokerage lost all its capital. FXCM revealed its clients owed the firm $225 million, more than the company's own net worth, and survived only through an emergency $300 million rescue loan. Even IG Group, better capitalized than most, absorbed roughly $50 million in losses that day. It would be easy to call these firms reckless. The more revealing detail is who didn't lose money: the handful of brokers who, instead of hedging in the real market, had simply been taking the other side of client trades all along. When the franc spiked, those client losses became straightforward profit, with no market exposure to worry about. Betting against your customers wasn't just more profitable that day. For some firms, it was the only strategy that survived intact. 2 years later, the story got uglier. In February 2017, American regulators revealed that FXCM, which had marketed itself for years as a conflict-free, no-dealing desk platform, had secretly built a relationship with a market maker quietly trading against FXCM's own customers, sharing in its profits while telling clients and regulators no such conflict existed. The SEC found the company $7 million and permanently barred both the firm and its founder from the American market. The lesson wasn't that the whole model was corrupt. Firms honestly hedging client risk weren't accused of fraud, just undercapitalized for a once-in-a-generation shock. The lesson was narrower and more unsettling. An industry worth trillions had grown to that scale, while customers had almost no way of knowing which kind of company they were dealing with, until a crisis or a regulator forced the truth into daylight. Regulators were about to make sure that ambiguity couldn't survive much longer. In the years after the franc shock, European regulators began measuring, for the first time, how customers actually performed. Studies across the EU found that 74 to 89% of retail CFD accounts lost money, with average losses per client ranging from roughly €1,600 to €29,000. This came from the firm's own client data. Bulletin International CNNV. In March 2018, European regulators responded with sweeping rules. Leverage slashed from hundreds to 1 down to as low as 34-1 on major currencies and 2-1 on crypto. Automatic closeouts once an account burned through half its margin, and a guarantee that clients could never again owe a broker more than they'd deposited. Most strikingly, every provider was now required to publish, in its own advertising, the exact percentage of its clients who lose money. The industry that had quietly benefited from customers not understanding the odds was now legally forced to publish those odds on the label. Customers kept signing up anyway. IG Group's own current disclosure states that 69% of its retail clients lose money, better than the 2018 industry average, but still meaning roughly 2 in 3 customers fund the platform's growth rather than their own gains. The warning didn't kill the business. It became part of it. For the survivors, the financial outcome was striking. IG diversified beyond spread betting into exchange-traded derivatives, American options trading through its 2021 acquisition of Tasty Trade, stock trading, and crypto. By 2025, the company Wheeler started with a £5,000 loan, was generating over £1 billion in annual revenue, serving more than 800,000 active clients worldwide, and sat comfortably in Britain's FTSE 250. Pestle Analysis FXCM went the other way. Banned from the American market, its reputation shattered, forced to sell its US client accounts, and rebuild as a smaller company under different ownership. The wider pattern, the model Wheeler improvised in 1974, didn't disappear when regulators understood it, or when a currency shock exposed its darkest version, or when honest players were forced to publish exactly how often clients lose. It adapted. The firms that thrived were, generally, the ones willing to be transparent about which side of the client they were really on, and the industry kept growing anyway. First, small workarounds can become universal business models. IG wasn't built to become an empire. It was built to dodge a narrow currency law. But the underlying insight, that you don't need to own an asset to profit from guessing its price, turned out to be one of the most exportable ideas in modern finance. Second, disclosure doesn't automatically change behavior. Regulators assumed publishing loss rates would shrink demand. It didn't. People kept signing up even after being told, in writing, that most of them would lose. Third, identical surfaces can hide opposite incentives. An honest hedging broker and a dishonest bookmaking broker look the same from the customer's chair. FXCM's collapse shows what happens when that ambiguity is exploited rather than resolved. Fourth, crises reveal true business models faster than any audit. It took one afternoon in the Swiss currency market to show which firms were managing risk and which were simply positioned to profit from catastrophe. Finally, and hardest to sit with, this is a legal, regulated industry, generating well over £1 billion a year, built substantially on a product where most participants lose as a predictable, structural outcome. Not bad luck, but design. That isn't fraud. It's something firms now have to say out loud. What they can't require is for customers to believe it applies to them. So how does a business make money when its customers lose in plain sight for 50 years without collapsing under the contradiction? Not through conspiracy, through structure, one built on a 1974 currency law, refined by technology and marketing, stress-tested by a single afternoon in the Swiss markets, and exposed by regulators who finally measured what had always been true. It survived being forced into the open, because the open hurt it far less than anyone expected. Wheeler set out to let a few friends bet on gold. What he actually built was a template, products where the platform's revenue and the customer's outcome can be quietly, structurally opposed, dressed in the same language of opportunity as any real investment. Some firms chose honesty about that arithmetic. Others chose concealment and paid for it. Both kept the machine running. Tell people, in writing, that most of them will lose and many will still click through, certain they'll be the exception. That isn't a flaw unique to trading apps. It's how people everywhere relate to risk. This industry didn't invent that instinct. It simply built a business patient enough to profit from it, one invisible spread at a time, for as long as people keep believing this trade will be the one that finally works.